The story of the Titanic begins not on the icy waters of the North Atlantic, but in the bustling shipyards of Belfast, Ireland. In the early 20th century, maritime travel was undergoing a transformation. The world was entering a period of industrial innovation, and with it came a race among shipping companies to dominate the Atlantic routes. Among these, the White Star Line sought not speed, but luxury, ambition, and prestige. Their answer: the Titanic, a ship that would be heralded as the largest, most magnificent vessel ever built by human hands. Construction began in 1909 at the Harland and Wolff shipyard, a place where steel, sweat, and ambition converged. Thousands of workers toiled tirelessly over 3 years, shaping the iron leviathan with precision and care. Each rivet, each plate of steel, each polished wooden panel contributed to a vision of perfection. The Titanic would measure 269 meters in length, have 10 decks, and rise to a height rivaling that of a 10-story building. It was powered by triple screws, driven by steam engines, and its engineering promised a speed of 21 knots, impressive for a ship of its size. Yet what fascinated the public most was the claim that the Titanic was virtually unsinkable. With 16 watertight compartments, each designed to contain flooding and state-of-the-art safety measures, the world would come to regard the ship as invincible. The interiors reflected a dedication to luxury unlike anything seen before at sea. First-class passengers would dine in gilded halls, stroll through promenades lined with polished oak, relax in a swimming pool, or exercise in a fully equipped gymnasium. The designers spared no expense. The finest furniture, intricate glasswork, and delicate lace curtains adorned the cabins. Second-class and third-class accommodations were modest by comparison, yet even they were designed with care, reflecting the White Star Line's ambition to provide comfort and dignity to all passengers. April 10, 1912, marked the Titanic's maiden voyage. She departed from Southampton, England, destined for New York, with scheduled stops at Cherbourg, France, and Queenstown, modern-day Cobh, Ireland. On board were 2,224 souls, millionaires, aristocrats, families, immigrants seeking a new life, and crew members entrusted with ensuring the voyage's success. Among the first-class passengers were John Jacob Astor IV, a wealthy American businessman, Isidore and Ida Strauss, co-owners of Macy's department store, and Margaret Molly Brown, who would later become famous for her courage during the sinking. Third-class passengers were primarily European immigrants, Italians, Irish, and Scandinavians, carrying hopes and dreams across the ocean. In the early days of the voyage, life on board appeared idyllic. The ship glided across calm seas, and passengers engaged in leisurely walks, games, and dances. The musicians, led by Wallace Hartley, performed in lounges, their music filling the halls with joy. Letters sent home reflected optimism and admiration for the Titanic's grandeur. Some marveled at the electrical lighting, the heated baths, or the telegraph system that connected the ship to the mainland. The world, it seemed, was contained within the steel and wood of the Titanic. Yet beneath this veneer of luxury and safety, warnings of danger emerged. Icebergs had been sighted across the North Atlantic that spring, and other vessels sent numerous cautions to all ships in the area. The Titanic's wireless operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, were inundated with messages, many trivial, and the more urgent warnings were sometimes overlooked or delayed. Captain Edward John Smith, a veteran mariner revered as the millionaire's captain, maintained course at a brisk 22 knots, confident in his ship's construction and his own experience. There was at this moment a fatal underestimation of nature's power. At 23:40 on the night of April the 14th, 1912, the lookout spotted an iceberg dead ahead. Frederick Fleet, perched high above on the crow's nest, rang the warning bell and telephoned the bridge. The Titanic attempted to maneuver away, but it was too late. A grinding collision tore through the ship's starboard side, piercing 5 of its watertight compartments. The sound was not a crash, but a tearing of metal and a groan from the ship itself. The unsinkable ship had been fatally wounded. Engineers immediately assessed the damage and realized the inevitable. The Titanic would sink. The hours that followed were a mixture of courage, confusion, and tragedy. In the moments immediately after the iceberg collision, the crew rushed to assess the damage. Thomas Andrews, the Titanic's chief designer, moved from compartment to compartment, noting the horrifying reality. 5 of the ship's 16 watertight compartments had been breached, sealing the fate of the vessel. He informed Captain Smith that the Titanic would not remain afloat for more than 2 hours. The grim realization began to permeate through the officers, but the public was largely unaware. Many passengers continued to enjoy the illusion of safety, wandering the decks, chatting, or attending to their own plans for the voyage. The first lifeboats were prepared under frantic and uncoordinated efforts. Officers in charge struggled to enforce the Women and Children First protocol, which varied in interpretation across the decks. In some cases, crewmen allowed women and children to board first. In others, men slipped in, either out of desperation or confusion. Lifeboats number 1 and number 2 were launched mostly empty, as officers feared overloading them in the dark. In contrast, other boats reached maximum capacity. On the boat deck, stewardesses helped passengers into the boats, while some women had to convince reluctant husbands or sons to step into them. Anxiety, fear, and disbelief mingled with acts of incredible bravery. Among the survivors' stories are those of the musicians who played relentlessly to maintain calm. Wallace Hartley and his orchestra performed near the first-class lounge. Their instruments clutched tightly, faces set in grim determination. Witnesses recalled the music floating across the deck, providing a brief sense of serenity amid mounting terror. This act of courage became emblematic of the human capacity for composure and altruism, even in the direst circumstances. As lifeboats filled, the orchestra's music was one of the last reminders of civilization amid the chaos of sinking steel and screaming passengers. The water was now encroaching rapidly, cold and merciless. On the starboard side, passengers clung to rails and ropes, trying to reach the lifeboats. Crewmen shouted instructions, assisted children, and urged people forward, yet the scale of panic and confusion slowed the evacuation. Families were torn apart. Mothers tried to keep young children safe, while elderly passengers struggled with fear and frostbite. Some men refused to leave, believing the ship unsinkable, while others helped strangers in acts of sheer heroism. Accounts from survivors speak of men removing life jackets from themselves to ensure women and children could wear them. The sense of morality and solidarity in those moments contrasted starkly with the relentless advance of death. By 1:30 a.m., the full magnitude of the sinking was apparent. Decks were tilting, staircases flooded, and the roar of water pouring into the ship was deafening. Officers attempted to maintain order, directing passengers to muster stations and lifeboats. But the scale of the disaster overwhelmed all planning. Some passengers resorted to climbing onto the deck rails, desperately searching for a secure position. Stories emerge of passengers jumping into the freezing water, clinging to debris, and attempting to swim toward distant lifeboats. The cold was immediate and paralyzing. Hypothermia would claim many within minutes. Heroic acts abounded amid the horror. John Jacob Astor IV ensured his wife, Madeline, boarded a lifeboat safely, giving her an engagement ring and urging her to survive. Isidore and Ida Strauss, deeply devoted, chose to remain together rather than be separated. They perished in the icy waters, holding hands and sitting quietly on deck. Benjamin Guggenheim reportedly donned formal evening attire, declaring that he was prepared to go down like a gentleman. These personal stories, verified through survivor testimonies, illustrate the diversity of human response in catastrophe: courage, resignation, love, and selflessness. As the Titanic neared the final moments of buoyancy, the ship's structure began to fail. Witnesses described the ship breaking apart between the third and fourth funnels, a massive tearing sound echoing as decks collapsed into the sea. Passengers and crew were thrown into the freezing waters or clung to debris, desperately seeking flotation. The water, at approximately -2 degrees Celsius, induced immediate shock. Within minutes, those immersed were incapacitated by the cold, struggling to stay conscious while the ship's lights flickered and finally went out. At approximately 2:20 a.m., the Titanic's bow fully submerged, followed by the stern, which rose briefly before collapsing. The survivors recount that the cries, gasps, and splashes in the dark ocean created a harrowing, almost surreal tableau. Among the lifeboats, passengers tried to paddle away from the wreckage, rescuing those who could reach them. Some boats returned to pick up swimmers, while others remained at a distance, fearing being pulled down by suction from the sinking ship. The scene was chaotic, yet punctuated by moments of extraordinary bravery. Crew and passengers alike helped strangers, shared blankets, and kept hope alive amid despair. The RMS Carpathia arrived hours later at around 4 a.m., navigating cautiously through a sea littered with debris and bodies. Her crew pulled survivors aboard, wrapped them in blankets, and provided medical care. Many were suffering from hypothermia, shock, and trauma. Reports from Carpathia's captain, Arthur Rostron, and his officers emphasized the tireless efforts of the crew in recovering as many as possible, despite limited space and the emotional weight of the scene. By the time the Carpathia reached New York, 710 souls had survived, while over 1,500 had perished, a figure that would shock the world and dominate international headlines. In the aftermath, formal inquiries were launched both in the United States and the United Kingdom. The British Board of Trade, led by Lord Mersey, and the U.S. Senate inquiry, chaired by Senator William Alden Smith, examined evidence from survivors, crew, and maritime experts. The investigations concluded that a combination of human error, insufficient lifeboats, overconfidence in technology, and lack of adequate iceberg warnings contributed to the tragedy. Officers were criticized for failing to heed repeated messages about ice, and the White Star Line faced scrutiny for not providing enough lifeboats and proper emergency training. The inquiries led to immediate reforms in maritime law. Ships were required to carry sufficient lifeboats for all passengers and crew, maintain continuous wireless monitoring, and observe stricter ice patrols. The Titanic disaster became a catalyst for the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, SOLAS, in 1914, a framework that continues to govern maritime safety to this day. Even decades later, the Titanic story retains a haunting power. Its wreck was discovered in 1985 by Robert Ballard at a depth of 3,800 meters, providing physical evidence of the ship's grandeur and tragic end. Artifacts from personal belongings to pieces of the hull were carefully cataloged, preserving the memory of those who perished. The rediscovery reignited public fascination while offering historians detailed insights into the final hours of the Titanic. The human stories remain central to its legacy. Survivors' accounts reveal a mixture of shock, grief, courage, and resilience. Letters, diaries, and testimonies document intimate moments of love, fear, and heroism. Captain Smith's last moments, though not fully verified, are remembered as emblematic of leadership and calm amid disaster. He was last seen on the bridge, facing the inevitable with dignity. Crew members, from stewards to engineers, displayed extraordinary bravery, many sacrificing their lives to save passengers. The Titanic, thus, is not merely a story of a ship, but a reflection of human character under extreme conditions. The lessons of the Titanic extend beyond maritime safety. The disaster underscores the dangers of overconfidence, the importance of preparation and training, and the human cost of technological hubris. It also highlights the capacity for altruism and courage in the face of overwhelming adversity. Over a century later, the Titanic remains a symbol of both human ambition and human fragility, a reminder that even the most advanced creations are vulnerable and that heroism can emerge in the darkest of hours. Through the narratives of the survivors, the reports of the inquiries, and the preserved remnants of the ship, the Titanic continues to captivate our imagination. Its story endures not merely as a historical fact, but as a moral and emotional lesson, resonating across generations. It reminds us that history is shaped not only by events, but by the people who experience them, their courage, their choices, and the legacies they leave behind. In remembering the Titanic, we honor those who lived, those who died, and those whose stories continue to teach us about resilience, humanity, and the inexorable power of the sea.